The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, and welcome back to the show 582 to 8500, which is of Shiny Side Out. Thank you very much. If you have not been listening too much before, listen too much now, because good for you to hear. Many things to listen, and also face and ears. And thank you very much, Bruno. We are going to
he comes and goes.
Comes and goes. Just as he wants us in as he wishes. We are going to talk about Nazi or the Third Reich, which is really Nazi party ideology and the occult. We have moved into the Nazi sciences, the super weapons, and some of them were informed by a belief in the supernatural, a belief in a higher level civilization before this one, or several, in fact, that might have existed. And some believe that the Nazis did find something in the Himalayas, Tibet, maybe in South America, maybe in the Antarctic. We don't know. Some people believe they found something somewhere. And maybe even just hints of something that was possible, which they then tried to recreate or retro-engineer or whatever. But certainly we've come across a mountain of evidence over the last few weeks that point to the German Reich, the Third Reich, wanting to create something massive somewhere. And Hitler, to the end, kept talking about his wonder weapons that would turn the tide of the war. And one of those activities was very closely linked to Hans Kammler and Project Giant, which we dissected somewhat in the last couple of weeks. We're going to give you a quick recap on this, and then we're going to go into some more detail on some of the other things. But there's a quick recap here. There's enough here for both Dave and I to do this. So beautiful, I'll go to here. Now, according to incomplete data, because we don't have all the data sets surviving World War II, at least 13,000 prisoners worked for the Project Giant, as it were. And most of them transferred from Auschwitz concentration camp. We all know Auschwitz was probably the most famous death camp in Nazi Germany. Well, Auschwitz itself, of course, is located in what is now Poland. The documents allow for the identification of 8,995 prisoners. So we know for a fact that at least that many we can identify by name. All of them were Jews. About 70% were from Hungary. The rest were from Poland, Greece, Romania, Czechoslovakia, the Netherlands, Belgium, as well as Germany. We also know that approximately 5,000 of them died in the construction as well as the experimentation that was going on at that location. They bought tunnels inside mountains, built roads and railway tracks, worked in the transportation of building materials as well. Mortality was very high because of disease, malnutrition, exhaustion, dangerous underground works, and the treatment of the prisoners by the German guards. Okay. Now, according to Albert Speer, the Minister for Armaments and War Production for the Third Reich. And in 1944, he, which is Hitler, had two underground headquarters blasted into mountains in Silesia and Thuringia. The project tying up hundreds of indispensable mining specialists and thousands of workmen. According to point 18 of the Führer Protocol, June 20, 1944, I reported, this is Albert Speer, to the Führer that at the moment a good 28,000 workers are building additions to the Führer's headquarters. According to my memorandum, again Albert Speer, of September 22, 1944, some 36 million marks were spent for bunkers in Rastenburg, which is the Walsh lair. 13 million marks, 13 million, for bunkers in Pullach near Munich to provide for Hitler's safety when he visited Munich. And now hold on to your heads. Now these first two, they were Hitler's bunkers. So the first bunker cost 36 million marks, or they spent that much on it, and they spent 13 million on the bunker near Munich. And these were for Hitler specifically. Okay. Now, how much do we think he spent on Project Giant? He spent, or at least then, up to that point, had spent 150 million marks. 150, and there wasn't much difference between the dollar and the mark at that point, as far as purchasing power is concerned. In today's terms, in today's monetary terms, we're talking several $billion worth of stuff. 150 million German marks. Now, and just one thing, and then I'll hand it to you, Dave. The project required 328,000 cubic yards of reinforced concrete, including some small quantities of masonry. So they had actually stoneworks rather than concrete. 277,000 cubic yards of underground passages, 36 miles of roads with 6 bridges, and 62 miles of pipes. The giant complex alone consumed more concrete than the entire population had at its disposal for air raid shelters in 1944. So just very quickly, I know, right? Just looking at the cost and the actual resources consumed, and then putting it into context for other things like air raid shelters, I think we can all agree that this is an astounding effort, an astounding, I guess, assignment of priorities as well. It's almost inconceivable that someone would do this unless there was a massive payoff at the end here. And what is that payoff? That's the question. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, according to Nikolaus von Below, Hitler's adjutant, the plans that were kept criticizing, the plans that we kept criticizing, I'll fix that in post, in those months, early 1944, included the construction of a huge new headquarters for the Fuhrer in Silesia, near Waldenburg, which was also to include Fürstenstein Castle within the estate of the von Pless princess. Hitler defended his orders and commanded that construction continue with the use of concentration camp prisoners managed by Speer. During the year, this is Nicholas von Below, visited the facility twice, and each time had the strong impression that I wouldn't see its completion. I tried to inspire Speer to somehow influence Hitler to give the order that the project be stopped. Speer said that was impossible. The extravagant work continued at a time when every ton of concrete and steel was so urgently needed elsewhere. Last thoughts. In July 1944, many of the firms working on Hitler's unfinished Wolf's Lair were moved to Lower Silesia to expedite the construction of Riese. However, unfavourable changes on the Eastern Front occurred much faster than anticipated for the Reich, and in January of 1945, the Red Army rampaged across Eastern Europe on a beeline for Berlin. Bypassing the Aal Mountains, an SS unit was able to remain in Wallam-Zeska until May 1945, before which time they had bricked or obliterated all entrances into the underground fortress, and whatever was or wasn't stored there subsequently disappeared. as did the estimated 7,000 to 30,000 POWs who built the complex. Next, Mickey, go ahead.
Buried beneath speculation. Of note is Speer's calculation of 213,000 cubic meters of Reich or giant tunnels. This is Project Giant. Today, less than 100,000 are known, suggesting that much of the complex may remain undiscovered. Survivor accounts, geological arrangements of the found tunnels, and the inability to fully explore them due to their increasingly dangerous deterioration support this possibility. It is presumed that all the tunnels were to eventually have been linked, and underground narrow gauge railways exist at some of the sites, as well as extensive plumbing that appears to lead nowhere. Due to the exodus of the German population and the military's protracted stay in the area upon war's end, there is scant first-hand information on the site or its purpose. Conspiracy theories abound, and many believe the Nazis proliferated the idea that Riese, again Project Giant, was intended as a headquarters in order to hide its true intention, citing German sources as too obvious and forthcoming. Some sensationalists believe a superweapon was in development here, while others speculate that confiscated Nazi treasure may still be buried in the Owl Mountains, including the missing Wroclaw gold and the famous Amber Room, which disappeared from St. Petersburg during the war. The mass graves of the prisoners who built the complex have never been found, and sadly, less absurd is the grisly likelihood that they were herded inside the complex before it was detonated.
Oh, wow.
So let's just pause here for a second to understand what we've been discussing. This project, specified as war deciding, okay? It was also given unprecedented resources and funding. Unprecedented. And the two Hitler bunkers, let's call them, at the two headquarters, in the end took second and third fiddle behind this project, as the companies that worked on them were requisitioned to work on this Project Giant. So this was not another Führer bunker, if you will, right? It was not that. It was not another command post. And I wonder, and bear with me here, two things come to mind. One, it seems that Kammler was able to get away. We do know that something was taken to Argentina. We know this on the Junkers transport plane. We have evidence for that something arrived in Argentina and then was shipped somewhere else. And it could have been the Bell, could have been that. And chances are that Kammler himself also made that trip, because the circumstances of his death are confusing, to say the least. Okay? And we know that neither the Russians nor the Americans had technology that approached from what we know the Bell was capable of. Yes, the Germans went into Russia and into the United States for their rocket expertise, for their nuclear expertise, right? All of that is true, right? I mean, both the Russian and the American space programs were built on the back of German scientists and engineers. That's a known fact. But this technology, which Hitler called war deciding, doesn't seem to have made it across, because if it had, by now we would have known about it. And it would have been used by either the Russians or the Americans to tip the Cold War in their favor. Okay? But it didn't. What was done in the Cold War, it was a space race, and then it was a nuclear arms race. Those are the two technologies that they got out of Germany and that they used to compete with each other. Now, what if part of the complex had become operational before, the advance of the Allied and Russian forces? What if it was in fact to do with time travel, for argument's sake? Because it wouldn't matter at that point when they finished it, even if they kept going today. Because as soon as they finished the work, the war would have been won. So we can surmise that they didn't finish or hadn't finished yet the war, because the war might have taken a very different outcome if they had succeeded in creating, inventing, realizing time travel. Unless, of course, there are, laws governing time travel which we simply are unaware of. So there is at least half of the complex that remains undiscovered. At least half. We just don't know. We haven't seen it. We don't know. We also haven't found the bodies of the people, let's call them, concentration camp inmates that built that place. Now we know 5,000 died because of the records, but we haven't found the living or the dead. Have they? And this is gonna remember, this is shiny side out, everyone. Have they been taken somewhere else? Were they taken somewhere else?
That's a good point.
Did to another place, another time? I don't know. Did the Nazis breach the barrier between the many worlds? Were they successfully traveling into other dimensions? Maybe. But I need to understand. I need to be very clear here, right, Dave? And this is really, really important. This project in Hitler's mind would change the outcome of the war. Okay. Now Hitler was many things, and in the end he became a bit erratic and all that. Sure enough. But he believed in his divine. Well, divine is maybe the wrong word here. But he believed in his predestined mission to do what he did. Because he felt his rise to power and all the things that happened to put him where he eventually became to. That was all part of his destiny. He was driven by that. And yeah, he might have become a little insane toward the end, but I don't think he would have gotten to the point of true insanity, because people around him would have removed him. That it would have just happened that way. And yet, this project, they put the best man they had on it. They pumped all of their resources into it. And they didn't care how many people were killed in the completion of the program. So these are all facts that we need to really understand. I don't think it's Nazi treasure. That wouldn't have warranted this kind of thing. It just wouldn't. Okay, there's something else here. Okay, and you don't have to be a sensationalist. You just follow where the data leads you. All the data points, okay, are leading us to conclude that this was of utmost importance. This was the most critical undertaking in Nazi Germany at the time, and maybe still is on some level. What do you think, Dave?
I agree. And as Shiny Side Out, we're allowed to propose ideas or support things that may not be written down and have proof.
Yeah.
I am with you, Mackie, on there must have been something bigger here that it was either planned for or being used for, things that had already been moved to it. Even though it looked like it was being a multi-phase deployed, so you establish a great deal of it with support. Remember, there was 2 power stations there at Risa. So what was it powering? What were they doing? Yeah. And we didn't find the bell when we swarmed or swept or combed across the captured territories at the end. We didn't find it. So where did it go?
Yep.
Was it activated and whoosh, and just disappeared out of this reality and turned up somewhere else? Possible. I mean, it is possible. If you had something like that, what would you do with it? And maybe it's just not as controllable as you might think. Remember, the first car engine didn't rev. They just had a clutch. They didn't make the carburetor. until later. So the first combustion engine just idled. Well, it ran fast, but it was idling until they could develop something to vary its idle speed, or its revs, as we know today. So I'm a car guy. I'm a rev head, apparently, says one of my friends. And, well, if you had a time machine, how do you dial it in? There's a good point. Who knows? I think they were right onto something. I think they were right on it, in it, around abouts, and I think it was really important. It was so important that they spent more money than they had, and diverted resources away from the wall that they were building. These were beachhead bunkers, because that was meant to be a lot denser than it turned out to be. Where's all the concrete? The concrete was it was like trying to get a lamb roast in the shops at wartime. You just couldn't. There was rationing. There was food rationing in our own sovereign nations at the time, because there was nothing. So you can imagine, if there is nothing and you're the boss diverting everything to an important project you can't talk about, come on, put the numbers together, guys. Follow the money. So
100%.
It leads to the next point that's highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
Go and take it.
I shall. Second. Disappear. That's the fun, isn't it? Here we go. Now, did the US fake top Nazis World War II suicide and spirit him away to get hands on Hitler's secret weapons program? This was written by Alan Hall in Berlin for Mail Online in 2014.
I'm going to say on the blind, yes.
Well, I'm not sure that they got Kammler himself. Now, the blood of thousands on his hands, SS General Hans Kammler killed himself in 1945 in the dying days of Hitler's Germany. That, at least, was his official fate. The man steeped in the horrors of the death camps had met his just deserts. However, it is now claimed that Kammler survived the war, spirited away to America, and given a new identity by the US authorities. For the general wasn't just an expert in the technicalities of industrial-scale slavery and slaughter, but he was also deeply involved in the Nazis' secret weapons program. The Americans, according to a TV documentary, were determined to have his know-how and not let him fall into the hands of the Russians. Both the US and the Soviet Union tried to recruit Hitler scientists after the war to help with their own space and military programs that we've discussed at length. But it is claimed that Kammler's record was so monstrous that his death had to be faked and he had to have a new identity. The whole history of suicide is staged, said Berlin historian Rainer Kalsch. There are several documents that clearly demonstrate that Kammler was captured by the Americans. Another expert, Matthias Uhl of the German Historical Institute in Moscow, said, "The reports from America are more credible than those given about the alleged suicide by Kammler's associates." Born in 1901, and by the end of the Second World War, Kammler was almost as powerful as SS Chief Heinrich Himmler and Armaments Minister Albert Speer. He had access to the Nazis' most advanced technology, including the weapons of retaliation, the V-1 and V-2 rockets. Now, that's another thing. Think about that for a second. That caused death and destruction in Britain, but came too late to turn the tide of the conflict. There's some sub-points here. Kammler designed and built the crematoria at Auschwitz, which incinerated most of the bodies of the estimated 1.2 million people murdered at the camp in Nazi-occupied Poland. He's the guy that designed and built the crematoria. I mean, okay. Kammler was also responsible for the construction of the so-called weapons of retaliation, the V1s and V2s that caused tremendous death and destruction in Britain, but which came too late to turn the tide of the conflict in Germany's favor. And this is really, quite the program. But that's not secret. I mean, we know about that now. So just imagine the things in the secret program that we haven't been told. He was also involved in the construction of death camps, including the design of the crematoria in Auschwitz, as we said. The history books say that one day after the Third Reich surrendered on May 9, 1945, he either shot himself or took poison in the former German city of Stettin, now Szczecin, in Poland. His body was never found. His body was never found. That's important. The whole story of suicide was staged by two of his closest aides who were committed to him. Karl tells ZDF TV in Germany. ZDF is the second German TV station. So there's the ARD and the ZDF. At the war's end, America, while taking part in the punishment of many top Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, also launched the covert Operation Paperclip, the secret exit of top Nazi scientists. ZDF, the German television channel, said in the documentary, sources say that Kammler was captured by the Americans and interrogated by US counterintelligence CIC. The Secret Service man responsible was Donald Richardson, a personal confidant of Allied Supreme Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The sons of the Secret Service men told program makers that their father was in charge of the German weapons export after 1945. One of them, John Richardson, said, "This engineer brought a special treasure from the Third Reich into the United States. He offered modern weapons for us. It was put to my father that he should bring this useful German into the United States to prevent him from falling into the hands of the Russian intelligence service." It was not revealed under what name Kammler lived or when he died, though some archival material speaks of a special guest living under Richardson's wing.
Ooh, the plot thickens.
I'm telling you. Which brings us, Dave,
to the bell.
Crazy.
Die Glocke. So it was a purported top secret Nazi scientific technological device, secret weapon, if you will, or Wunderwaffe, wonder weapon, described by Polish journalist and author Igor Witowski in Prawda o Wunderwaffe in 2000. It was later popularized by military journalist and author Nick Cook, as well as by writers such as Joseph P. Farrell and others who associate it with Nazi occultism and anti-gravity or free energy research. Die Glocke has become a popular subject of speculation, and a following similar to science fiction fandom exists around it, and other alleged Nazi miracle weapons or Wunderwaffen. Mainstream reviewers, such as former aerospace scientist David Mira, express skepticism that such a device existed. Now, the history. Discussion of Die Glocke originated in the works of Igor Witowski, his 2000 Polish language book Prawda o Wunderwaffe, The Truth About the Wonder Weapon, reprinted in German as Die Wahrheit über die Wunderwaffe. Am I doing good, Mickey? He's on the floor. He's paralyzed.
Very nice.
He's paralyzed with hatred. Refers to it as the Nazi bell. Witowski wrote the first discovered, and Witowski wrote that he first discovered the existence of Die Glocke by reading transcripts from an interrogation of former Nazi SS officer Jacob Sporenberg. According to Witowski, he was shown the allegedly classified transcripts in August of 1997 by an unnamed Polish intelligence contact who said he had access to Polish government documents regarding Nazi secret weapons. Witowski maintains that he was only allowed to transcribe the documents and was not allowed to make any copies. Although no evidence of the veracity of Witowski's statements has been produced, they reached a wider audience when they were retold by British author Nick Cook, who added his own views to Witowski's statements in The Hunt for Zero Point. You're probably familiar with that work. Author Jason Colavito wrote that Witowski's claims were recycled from the 60s. Rumors of Nazi occult science, the first published in Morning of the Magicians, and describes Die Glocke, as a device few outside of fringe culture think actually existed. In short, it looks to be a hoax, or at least a wild exaggeration. Oh, Jason. What are you, an idiot? Sorry, I watched too much Jimmy Reese. Nicky,
I love Jimmy Reese.
back to you.
Jimmy Reese is funny.
I know.
Yeah, no, look, just on that. Sorry,
I never thought I'd be able to bring Jimmy Reese into it, but when I saw Jason, I couldn't help myself.
Jason. What about Christmas paper? No, if you haven't seen any of this work, you should. It's funny. Now, it's important to understand that there will always be people that will deny, no matter what is being put forward. And you have to also ask yourself about motivations. What are the motivations for someone like Witowski to go ahead and just make these claims up? What's the point? You know what I mean? I mean, why would you? Well, but look, it could be for fame, it could be for anything, but ultimately, it is really up to you, the esteemed listener, to make up your mind as to what you think is plausible and what is not. Now, allegedly, an experiment carried out by the Third Reich and its scientists working for the SS in a German facility known as Der Riese, or the Giant, near the Wenceslaw mine and close to the Czech border. Die Glocke, the bell, is described as being a device made out of a hard, heavy metal, approximately 2.7 meters or 9 feet wide and 3.7 to 4.6 meters high, which is 12 to 15 feet, having a shape similar to that of a large bell. According to an interview of Witowski by Cook, this device ostensibly contained 2 counter-rotating cylinders, which would be filled with a mercury-like substance, violet in color. This metallic liquid was codenamed Serum 525 and was stored in tall, thin thermos flasks, a meter high, and encased in lead, which might speak to potential radioactivity, potentially, or other, or other radiation. We don't know. Additional substances said to be employed in the experiments, referred to as Leichtmetall, which is light metal, included thorium and beryllium peroxides. Witowski describes die Glocke, when activated, as having an effect zone extending out 150 to 200 meters.
Wow.
It's quite large, which is about 490 to 660 feet, which would explain the size of the underground constructions, I guess. Within the zone, crystals would form in animal tissue. Blood would gel and separate, while plants would decompose into a grease-like substance. What that tells me is it affects whatever it is on a cellular level. Quite unlike radioactive materials or nuclear radiation, because that it destroys the cells. This seems to be a little different, especially crystals forming in tissue. That's really interesting. Now, blood would gel. What happens when you're exposed to radioactivity? Your blood cells are damaged, and you suffer from anemia and eventually blood cancers and such. But it doesn't turn into gel. Now, Witkowski also said that 5 of the 7 original scientists working on the project died in the course of the tests. Not surprising if you're working with new stuff. Makes you wonder how they came up with that, doesn't it? Because the thing is this, right? I mean, whenever you come across something new, the people that first handled it usually die. Like if you Marie Curie, as a case in point when it came to the discovery of uranium and plutonium and general radioactivity. So she died from the exposure. So it is clear that these people were experimenting with elements that were new or that they didn't know everything about. Right? Makes sense. Okay, based upon certain external indications, Witkowski states that the ruins of a concrete framework, aesthetically dubbed the Henge, in the vicinity of the Wenceslav mine, some 3.1 kilometers or 1.9 miles southeast of the main complex Sokolek, underground works of Project Riese, may have once served as a test rig for an experiment in anti-gravity propulsion generated with the bell, the Glocke. Now, we've seen the Henge, both Dave and I. It truly looks like a concrete Henge. It could have held a cooling tower, right? It could have been a scaffolding, if you will, for a flying device. All we know is it existed, it was there, it still is there. However, and this is what I just said, the relic structure itself has also been interpreted to resemble the remains of a conventional cooling tower, industrial cooling tower. Witkowski's statements, along with Cook's views, prompted further conjecture about the device from various American authors, including Joseph P. Farrell, Jim Mars, and Harry Stevens. In his book, Hitler's Suppressed and Still Secret Weapons, Science and Technology, 2007, Stevens concludes that the violet mercury-like substance described by Witkowski could only be red mercury because normal mercury has no fluid compounds according to conventional wisdom. Stevens presents a story attributed to German scientist Otto Czerny, as told to the then 13-year-old Greg Rowe around 1961, which alleged that a concave mirror on top of a device which seemed similar in description to the bell provided the ability to see images from the past during its operation.
Wow.
Bow, bow, bow.
If you could be there
buddy.
And not die.
Right?
Yeah. All right. Deeper into the rabbit hole. Down we go. Nazi bell behind the myth. Plasma at 15 million degrees inside a spherical tokamak. It's a visible. I can see. There's a picture here. You can't see it, but that's plasma. Now we're experimenting with fusion reactors, which just generate plasma. Not unlike this, but it really, really super high temperatures, even higher than 15 million. I think it's 30 million degrees. So anyway, put most simply, the Nazi bell was in fact a heavy particle accelerator used as an artificial neutron source to breed protactinium 233 from thorium 232. Protactinium would naturally degrade after 27 days into pure bomb-grade uranium 233. Uranium 233, derived from spent reactor waste, is often contaminated by uranium 232. When thorium 230 gets bombarded by a second neutron, but in a particle accelerator, this process does not have time to occur, and thus uranium 232 contamination is as low as 1 part per million and thus as safe to handle as weapons-grade plutonium. An aside, protactinium-233 results from the decay of thorium-233 as part of the chain of events used to produce uranium-233 by neutron irradiation of thorium-232. It is an undesired intermediate product in thorium-based nuclear reactors and is therefore removed from the active zone of the reactor during the breeding process. Analysis of the relative concentrations of various uranium, thorium, and protactinium isotopes in water and minerals is used in radiometric dating of sediments, which are up to 175,000 years old, in modelling of various geological processes. And that was your aside, Becky, and I stole it from you.
That's all good.
You may continue.
Oh, no. It's just the side in general.
Yes, I know, but go ahead.
Okay, then. According to speech notes recently uncovered in KGB archives, Heisenberg advocated harvesting protactinium for a nuclear weapon at the Harnack House Conference in July 1942. Later, whilst interned at Farm Hall, Cambridgeshire after the war, this is our Heisenberg, from the uncertainty principle, by the way, also identified harvesting protactinium as one of the 3 methods of obtaining fissile material for a nuclear bomb. The other 2, of course, being to either enrich U-235 or to reprocess plutonium from spent fuel in a thermal nuclear reactor. Our history books tell us all about these 2 other methods in Nazi Germany, but are strangely silent on the protactinium harvesting project. Why is that? The wartime chairman of AEG, Hermann Bucher, revealed to OSS, which is now CIA, informant Erwin Respondek, that his company was funding development of a heavy particle accelerator for the atomic bomb project at Bissingen. The process harnessed the fluorescent quality of mercury to cause collisions between electrons and photons, which in result released thermal neutrons. The device was surrounded by a concave beryllium mirror to reflect neutrons back into a mass of thorium oxide placed at the core. The machine generated this X-ray plasma in orbit around an axle which spun 2 carefully frequency-phased contra-rotating drums. Again, it's the two things which are spinning. And in fact, most movies that we see about this actually have that detail.
Oh.
Which is really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Respondek also revealed to the OSS that Heisenberg worked closely with Swiss engineer Dr. Walter Dallenbach at a secret facility known as Forschungsstelle D, which just means research place D, at Bissingen to develop the Nazi bell. A report by the OSS in November 1944 cited information from an engineer named Nagelstein, who related Otto Hahn's laboratory at Tailfingen, in a town close to Bissingen, was using thorium to obtain uranium for an atomic bomb. Dave?
How the story emerges. In August of 1997, a Polish intelligence officer with access to Polish government documents made writer Igor Witkowski aware of the Nazi bell. Original documents came from war crime interrogation of former SS Lieutenant General Jacob Sporenberg after the war. According to Witkowski, whilst working as a military journalist, an undisclosed member of Polish military intelligence showed him some interesting documents. Witkowski received discreet access over a period of a month, during which he transcribed files by hand. These documents have not been independently verified. However, there are several less well-detailed corroborations of the Bell project from entirely different sources. Leader for the Bell project was Professor Walther Gerlach, who was also the leader of Germany's uranium project from January 1944. Hello. It's logical to assume, therefore, that the bell was part of Nazi Germany's atomic weapons project. Witkowski read from Sporenberg's depositions for his war crimes trial of a centrifuge device shaped like a bell with a hemispherical domed top. The outer bell was made of 3-inch thick ceramic, but much like high-voltage porcelain insulator. Said to be 9 feet in diameter and 12 to 14 feet high, it consumed prodigious amounts of electrical power and glowed violet blue when operated for short periods. Inside the bell was located 2 contra-rotating drums. Norwegian-born physicist Rolf Weidro wrote in his autobiography about development of the bell at Hamburg by the company C.H. Müller. In his patent, his diagram showed one sphere inside another spun on a common axle. As is common with particle accelerators, a vacuum has to be created to propagate plasma inside these evacuated chambers. Then heated mercury vapor would have been bled into the cavity and then, once spun up, subjected to powerful discharges of electricity to ionize the mercury. Under this influence, the mercury would fluoresce and photons would collide with extremely energetic electrons, creating gamma rays. These X-rays, as well as gamma rays, in turn would stimulate the beryllium oxide in the cerium-525 to emit thermal neutrons. That's like a neutron bomb, Mackie. In turn, these thermal neutrons would be absorbed by the thorium-232, changing it into protactinium-233. Weidro called this device Wirbelrohr, or vortex tube. Patents for variations on the same thing had been applied for in 1935 by Professor Max Steenbeck and his rival Swiss scientist Dr. Walter Dallenbach. After World War II, Steenbeck cooperated with the Soviets to replicate the nicer bell. The Soviets named it tokamak. The bell concept exploited an even earlier patent. In March of 1934, Hungarian scientist Leo Szilard applied for a patent which was titled Improvements in or Relating to Transmutation of Chemical Elements. This patent described how radioactive bodies are generated by bombarding suitable elements with neutrons. Szilard went on to describe such uncharged nuclei penetrate even substances containing the heavier elements without ionization loss and cause the formation of radioactive substances. Mercury, alternate accounts say amalgams of mercury, was spun inside these drums. In likelihood, the mercury was introduced from beneath as a heated vapor. Jelly-like compounds of beryllium with thorium were located in flasks contained within the central axis. The Nazis were known to have made special paraffin from deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, because of its catalytic qualities in radioactive exchanges. Mercury has also played a role by releasing photons into the plasma. It is the collision of energetic electrons with photons which gives off gamma radiation. Beryllium compounds used in the Nazi bell were called cerium-525. During World War II, Nazi scientists discovered paraffin was useful as a moderator in reactor experiments. Paraffin would fit the description of cerium-525 as a pinkish jelly-like substance. Pink color possibly came from the mixing of mercury or iodide, also known as red mercury, into the compound. Thus, by implication, cerium-525 most likely contained beryllium and thorium suspended in heavy paraffin. Meki.
And yeah, look, and then we don't know, but I like the detail that we're exposed to here. And now again, this is still a hypothetical, and we haven't replicated this process as far as I know, but again, we may have. And the critical thing here is that this uses vortex physics, which I believe lies at the heart of any kind of physics we're going to encounter in the future. Vortices or vortex physics is going to be primarily, like, it's going to be a
torsion physics.
Torsion, 100%, absolutely. Because that's what the universe that we can see, at least, essentially is torsion and vortices. That's what we are. Now, this is going into the location of where the Nazi Bell project was initially housed. And that was, in fact, in a basement beneath the Charity Hospital in Berlin. And thus, the project was known as Charity Anlage, or, unlike these installations, a charity installation. From November 1943, the Nazi Bell was housed in an underground laboratory beneath Gandau Airfield on the western outskirts of Breslau, now known as the Polish city of Wrocław. 525 compounds were supplied from a laboratory in the city of Danzig, now known as Gdynia. After operation, the spent and altered compound was reprocessed at a laboratory west of Breslau, then known as Neuberg. It was shifted from Gandau in November of 1944 to Fürstenstein Castle, and later, in December 1944, located inside the Wenceslav mine. Following the war, Professor Manfred von Ardenne led two Soviet scientists, Nikolai Flerov, aka N.J. Frolov, and Igor Kurchatov, to the Wenceslav mine and gave them a description of installing what he called a cyclotron in the mine. Now, just for a second, focusing on these couple of paragraphs, it is clear that the laboratory, its equipment, the bell itself, etc., were relatively easy to move. I mean, it was not impossible to move it, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
And it moved a number of times, in fact, during the war. So in my mind, that makes it all the more likely that, in fact, it was moved toward the end of the war to make sure it didn't fall into, what they perceived to be the wrong hands. All right? Because people always in the past have said, oh, well, this setup was fairly elaborate. You couldn't really move it that easily. Clearly, it was moved in the war a number of times. And if it had been hard, they wouldn't have done it. Not likely. Okay. Unless we came up to necessary conditions, I'm very sure it wouldn't have been necessary quite yet. Okay, now this mine was abandoned before the war. Above ground, there was a power station with 2 steam cooling towers, or so they say. The bases of these have become known by various names, like the Henge, after Stonehenge, or the Flytrap. Bizarre claims are made by some that these are related to Nazi UFOs. Well, I don't think they're necessarily bizarre claims, but let's just sit that there. Near the mine entrance, Nobel Dynamit AG operated a bullet manufacturing plant. Wenceslav mine was also known by its codename complex Milkov. A short distance away was Ludwikovice. The area and water had been part of Germany's Silesia region, but after the war, most Germans were forced into East Germany, and their homes were turned over to Polish refugees. In German, the village was called Ludwigsdorf. Now, Nobel Dynamit AG, actually, these are the people. So Nobel invented dynamite, and there were a number of factories in Germany that produced explosive and other things for the Nazi war machine. In fact, my hometown had a Dynamit Nobel complex factory, massive factory, that was targeted by the Allies in World War II. And in one of those raids, an entire street in my village was destroyed, including its inhabitants, because of a missed Allied bomber target. And in the cemetery, in the home village, if you will, there's an entire road dedicated to all the people that died that night. And then because I was curious, I used to go through the cemetery and I wanted to know what happened. So this is what happened. So these Nobel dynamite sites were prime targets for the Allied bombing raids, just as an aside. Tell us about the witnesses, Dave.
No, because there's only 1 minute left.
Let's not talk about the witnesses, Dave.
We're going to do that next week.
We will indeed.
That's when that is going to happen.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Look, this fascinates me. Always has. Time travel. World War II, the Nazis and their hunt for anything from the past that might help them get some advantage in World War II, and I really think that they had some connections because they were advancing so fast that if they'd only waited a little bit, but still had that pressure to advance their tech, they may very well have. We'd all be speaking German.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, look, this has been the end of 2 hours of David Mackey's Shiny Side Out, and catch us next week. Yeah, get us for 7 a.m. Eastern US time on Tuesday and Thursday for Plato's Cave. And in the meantime, sit back and relax because Jer Bear's got his awesome after-hours show coming up next. Take care, everyone.